Rucham Aboim B'Shem Hashem, B'Shem Yidin Shir. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov Smith Shita on דיני Kais Pogum V'Oifen Tikuna. When does the Kais Shel Bracha become Pogum? Rabbi Yakov is sponsoring a shir called Yidin Shir at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Harav Smith.
Someone asked me, he was just married and he had his first guest. And he didn't know what to do with the Kais Shel Bracha. Should he drink it first and give it to the guest? And I thought it was a good idea to discuss that, especially Hina Yamim Vayrachim, like we say in the yotzei, the Yom Tova coming, you have guests and you have to give out the Kais Shel Bracha. But then I looked into it a little more, and Bemis, it brings us to the sugya, the very big sugya of wine that's Pogum, which is Negeya every day, by a Sheva Brachas, by a Bris, Shabbos, Yom Tiv, Pesach. So it's another one of those sugyas that are timeless and timely. What does it mean, Pogum, and how does that affect the Kais Shel Bracha? So the emphasis, Pogum, is in two places in Shas, at least 4 places in Shulchan Aruch, a big and a very beautiful sugya. So let's see. In Psachim Kuf Hayamid Beis, the Gemara says, a scenario, someone comes home, it's yotzei Shabbos, he ready to have a Ma'ariv, and he only has 1 kais of wine. So for us, what's the challah? Make Havdalah and have Mala Malka. But in those days, as the Gemara says, they were very makbid to bench ala kais. They would not bench without a kais. So what do? You only have 1 kais, and you have to have 2 mitzvahs. You have to make Havdalah, and you have to, of course, bench ala kais. So the Gemara says an unbelievable Kiddush, and that's the way Taisus, Daf Kovav, and Psachim, the Mechakapit, and also Taisus, Psachim, Kobeis, Mebeis, Manichai, spelled this out, that the Gemara is telling us an unbelievable Kiddush. Because we don't want to bench without a kais, what you should do is eat Malav Malka before Havdalah. Then you'll bench ala kais, and after benching you'll add the Havdalah. Frag the Gemara the obvious question: why don't you make Havdalah ala kais, drink a little, be it, and then have Malav Malka, and you don't have to eat before Havdalah? Zok the Gemara, Shma Mina, Tamoi, Pogum. If you're going to make Havdalah first and drink even a little bit of it, so you would have enough to make a Kais Shel Bracha of a benching, but Lamaisa, you are Pogum the Kais, and Tamoi, Pogum. Zok the Rashbam, which expands our sugya today in a much greater way. Pogum is lav dafka for Kiddush. It's benching, it's Kiddush, any Kais Shel Bracha. And Taka the Gemara in the next Amud Daf Kovav Mesachim, Rav Idi Kapid Akasa the Begima, the Kiddush, Havdalah, Berchas Hamazon, Ulachol Bracha Shetiknu, L'Sadron, Al Yayin Zok the Rashbam. Pogum is not only Kiddush, it's any Kais Shel Bracha. Again, even Sheva Brachas and Mila. So we see the importance of Kais Shel Bracha, of Pogum, in a very extreme way. Chazal allowed a person to eat before Havdalah, but don't use a kais that's Pogum. There's actually a second Gemara, and that's in Brachas Daf Nun Beis, where the Gemara says that they had a problem of Pogum. So the Gemara says that's why they didn't make Havdalah before the Suda. Zok the Gemara, but there's one exception. The Tomulei Biyadei, Zok the Ritva, what does that mean? The only time it's Pogum is when you drink from the kais. So the remaining shiurei kais is Pogum. If you pour it off before you drink it, either you pour it into your hand, which we don't do, but pour it into a cup, that's not Pogum. So what does Pogum mean? Not that it's missing from the kais. Pogum means that someone drank from the kais and now it is Pogum, it's tainted. Now, Lamaisa, the Rashbam spells out beferish. Pogum is not awesome. If you want to drink it during the Suda, fine. You want to drink it on a Tuesday morning, you can make a bracha on it. It's not treif. It is lacking a chashivas. So we'll use the word Pogum versus kais mahuda. But it's not treif. What's the reason why Pogum is awesome? So that's simple, apisvara. It's used wine. It's second-hand wine. Someone drank from it, and you're not very keen drinking someone else's wine. the Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Ayin, Sif Tezayin quote there, Cheretz Rabbah Perek Zayin, that you should not drink from a kais and give it to someone else, because he might be embarrassed to refuse. He might drink it, and it comes to sakana. So Mr. Bura quotes Savos Abloz Agadol, never drink from what someone else drank from. Okay, and we need it's a little of an issue why we're not makbid on this, but the point is, it's understandable. Wine that was drunk by somebody else is an inferior wine. Okay, if you get shirayim from a great Rebbe, no, we overlook it. But drinking shirayim of someone else, and this is basically a pasuk in Malachi, the beginning in Perek Aleph, pasuk Ches. The Navi gives Klal Yisrael strong musa that they used to bring kabbalah that were inferior. They would bring an animal that was lame, that was blind, and the Navi gave them starka musa. Would you give that animal to your sar, to your minister? You think he would be appeased by that? And the Gemara in two places, in Sukkah, Daf Lamed, Baba Basra, Tadik Zayin Amid Beis, uses this halacha l'maisa. For example, the Gemara in Baba Basra says wine that has a very bad smell, you can use for Kaishal Bracha. It's not spoiled. Would you give a minister wine that has a bad odor? And Zoktam Ram Chalava, and our Sugyam Sachim, this is the reason why Yayim Pogum is puzzled. Because it is inferior. And Lavush, in our Simon, today most of the time our Simon is Kuf Pei Beis, Siv Gimel Zok Lavush, that the psul of Yayim Pogum is Hakrivei Yunah. It's like a mum in a behemoth for a carbon. That's one reason. There is a second reason, and that the Magen Avram and our Simon Siv Katan Yud says this. Just like a mizbeach has to be whole, if it's missing, the mizbeach is puzzle. So too, a koishal bracha is like a mizbeach. We'll soon see what that means, and therefore it has to be perfect. If it's pogum, it's not perfect. Now this the Magen Avram says it pretty briefly, but you look in the Sefer Teres Chaim on Sanhedrin Kuv Beis. He was one of the Kadmoinim, and he always had something very precious to say. You'll notice a very interesting Sefer. It's a small Sefer, but he always has something very interesting to say. And on there the Gemara says that you have to make a bracha on a sholem even during the week. You have a roll, a bagel, keep it sholem for the moitzi. Zok Teres Chaim, why? So he says, you'll notice that our shulchan, our eating, is very halik. It's daimel mizbeach. We have salt on the table. We don't put children on don't allow children to climb on the table. Daimel mizbeach. The aleph of mizbeach is it has to be sholem. So a bread that's not sholem is incomplete. And then he says, I think this is also the hezbollah why Yayim Pogum is possible for Kiddush or any Kaishal Bracha. Because Yayim Pogum is not sholem. Someone drank from it. Not only because it's missing, but it's not complete. It's tainted. It's always kedai to hear, in a world that makes so little of people, some people love to believe that we came from monkeys. Again, just to make a person no longer choshev, so you can do what you want, but you didn't have to know what we do is important. We're not eating, we're being oisik in a mizbeach. The bread has to be whole, we have to have salt, and now we understand this is koishel bracha. Koishel bracha has to be perfect because what we do is very important. Okay, so this is the two reasons for pogum. It's two Gemaras, two reasons. As we'll see, it's all over Shulchan Aruch, but what's important for now, the Rashba in Brachas Mem Zayin points out that the problem of pogum is, if you want to use this as a koishel bracha, you want to act as bracha, you're not going to get a bracha from pogum. It's inferior. It's lacking. So koishel bracha has to be perfect. Pogum is imperfect. Understandably, as we said earlier, it's not only a din in Kiddush. The Rashbam spells it out in Psachim Kovav. It's any koishel bracha. But Iboy is saying a svara. It's even pashtan svara, because the psul has nothing to do with Kiddush. The psul is, if you want a koishel bracha, to have an effect, it has to be a better quality wine, and Pogum is not a better quality wine. And you'll notice that this is in Shulchan Aruch Kuf Pei Beis, Kuf Tzadik, Reish Ayin Aleph Sif Yud, Reish Tzadik Vav Aleph, and we'll soon see in Hilchas Pesach, Tov Ayin Beis, Mr. Sif Katan Lamed Aleph. All these cases we see Yayin has to be not Pogum, has to be Mehuda. The question is, Bidi Eved, if you only have Yayin Pogum, is it better to make Kiddush on Pogum, or no, you're not yotzei? If you made Kiddush and found out it was Pogum, do you have to repeat the Kiddush? So you think that it's a funny shayla, but it's not. The Mechaber says in Reish Ayin Beis, a person made Kiddush on wine that had a bad smell, even though the wine is drinkable, he's not yotzei Kiddush. Zok Mishbur has to repeat the Kiddush. It's just like he made Kiddush and it was water, so the Kiddush is no good. If the wine is puzzle, then the Kiddush is puzzle. And Mr. Bur explains, why is a bad smelling wine puzzle b'di eved? So it's definitely shaykh that the wine that's problematic will puzzle the Kiddush. So now the shayla is, can we say that regarding Yayin that's Pogum? So, l'chayra, al pi seichel, it's telling you two reasons. If the reason for Pogum is that it's lacking a ma'ila, it's not like a mizbeach, very, very important. But you can't say it's b'di'evet pasul. A lacking a ma'ila is lacking a ma'ila. But if you learn hakiveino lefechasecha, that we find in halacha, it's a psul b'di'evet. And Re'ez Apella, the Rashbam on our Gemara, in Psachim Kuf Vav, he says, look at the Lashon Gemara. Rav Idi kopid akisa pagama. He was makbid not to use a kois pagum. Zok the Rashbam, the word makbid sounds like only a chatchila. It's a kepeda. Toisvis, of an art, quotes the Rashbam, and he says it can't be. If the Gemara allows us to drink and eat before Havdalah, imagine that. You're going to have Malak before Havdalah. Because to avoid using a Pogum, so how could it be Pogum is not Makiv? So Toisvis holds Mi'ikir Din, Yayin Pogum is Pasol even B'di'evet. But then he does something interesting. Mihu, Royu, Rashbam, Lismaich Allah B'shas Atchak. He defers to the Rashbam. Rashbam says it's Kash B'di'evet. I mevatel daiti, it's kosher b'di'evet. And that's the halacha l'maisa in the Shulchan Aruch, the end of Kuf Pei Beis. But Mechaber says a bigger Kiddush. Not only if you made Kiddush on Pogum and you found that it's Pogum, that it's okay, but let's say you're on a desert island, you only have Ervias of Yayin Pogum. Should you make Kiddush or forget about it? So the Shulchan Aruch, b'shas atchak, mevorech, al kois pogum, you're allowed to make Kiddush. So it's sort of like a b'di'evet l'chatchila. In other words, not just if you did it, it's okay, but it's so much kosher that if you have nothing else, better make Kiddush than no Kiddush. In other words, if you only have spoiled wine or water, then better nothing. You can make Kiddush on nothing, but this is not nothing. So that's how much the Shulchan Aruch accepted the Rashbam and Toisvis concession that b'di'evet it's okay. In fact, we also see how much you should try to avoid Pogum. The Mishnah Berurah in Reish Ayin Aleph, Sif Katan Mem Gimel, he says if someone has Pogum, it's probably better, he says tzarchiyim, but it's probably better to make Kiddush on the Pas, Friday night. Even though we avoid making Kiddush on Pas Friday night, but Zok the Mishnah Berurah, if you have no other choice, Kiddush on Pas is better than Yayin Pogum. Maybe a bigger Kiddush. In Hilchas Havdalah, Reish Tzadik Vav, Sif Beis, the Ramah says, if someone only has Pogum, so it's probably better, he says, in that case, to make on the Pogum than to make on Chamar Medina. Chamar Medina is like a substitute for wine, but here you have wine. So why are you using Chamar Medina? So make on wine. So the Mishnah Berurah, the Magen Avraham seems to hold, if you only have Pogum, it's better Pogum than Chamar Medina. So here he's saying this yotzei that Chamar Medina is better than Pogum. Sorry, the Ramah said that you should make on Pogum, and Mishnah Berurah says, that Magen Avraham says, better make a Chamar Medina, not make on Pogum. That's how much Pogum is a problem. So he saw two halachas. Okay, let me tell you a Ma'aseh Shehaya that's going to lead us to a very important yotzei. Someone made Kiddush Friday night, drank the wine, and as soon as he finished, his son, Mama, shrieked, "Oi, I can't believe it, I'm sorry." It seemed that a younger child took the bottle of, it was grape juice, rather, took the bottle of grape juice and drank from it. And put it back in the refrigerator. The older son saw that, and he realized this is Mamish Pogum, the Chaladeis. But he forgot to tell his father, and his father made Kiddush on Yayim Pogum. What would you suggest to this person? He was very unhappy with that turn of events, you can imagine. What would you tell him? Was he yotzei? Yeah. Okay. Is there any eitzah now? Maybe there is. Let me tell you. The truth is that we could say this, that in Yayim Pogum there are really two different halachas. You understand? Lamdish, there are zwei dinim, but it's literally zwei dinim. One din that we associate that with is you can't make Kiddush on Yayim Pogum. If the boy drank the wine, so it's not treif. You could have it by the Suda, but don't make it a Kiddush. But there's another halacha. That's a geya more often than the first halacha. Let's say I make Kiddush, it's not Pogum. I drink from it, I pour it into another cup, and I give it to someone else. So it's Pogum for him. He's not making Kiddush. The Torah says in Pogum there are two halachas. Make Kiddush on Pogum, on non-Pogum, and the shoimim have to drink wine that's not Pogum. Why? Zil basa taima. You want to get a bracha, Rabbi Yid? Yayin Pogum doesn't do the trick. So there are two dinim in Yayin Pogum. Don't make Kiddush or any bracha on Yayin Pogum. And even if you're not making the Kiddush, don't drink wine that's Pogum. That's what we'll talk about when they give the chassid and challah. It's interesting. They give the chassid and challah the mixed up wine. Both of them are Pogum. Right? One drank from, each one was drank from. And Takra Machab Kuf Beis Dalid Kuf Tzadik Sif Aleph and Reish Ayin Aleph Tezayin Yuzayin all spelled this out. That in Pogum means don't make Kiddush on Pogum, and if you're a Shoimeya, you want the bracha, make sure it's not Pogum. Oh. It's the same Rashba. You want a bracha, it has to be non-Pogum. So now, believe it or not, if this person would be thinking, you know what he should really do? He made Kiddush on a cup of grape juice that his child drank. This is Pogum. But he also put on the table before Kiddush a bottle of wine, and he likes to drink that wine by the Suda. So the halacha is the gofen and the Kiddush goes on the grape juice, and also the wine on the table that he's willing to drink during the Suda. You look at the Mishnah Berurah in Reish Ayin Aleph, the end of Sivkat Ayin Ches, who says a Kiddush Gadol. I made Kiddush on a case of wine, and before I drank it, I dropped it on the floor, spilled out. So you'd have to make another gofen, unless you had wine on the table, Shas Maisa, the gofen went on that wine, so it's considered Kiddush wine, drink that without a new bracha. So now it comes out an interesting yisoid. If he made Kiddush on the Yayin Pogum, so he was, but the Eved yotzei to the Kiddush. But if you want to make the Shtiyah Lachatchila, it's a simple eitzah. Take from that bottle of wine on the table, that's not Pogum, and drink from it. Where's the bracha on that? The bracha on the Kiddush. I saw this in a new sefer, a wonderful sefer, Kais Yeshua's Amid Ayin Dalid, who says this yisoid, and he's right. Now I know this exact story is not so common, but you know what is common? We have to hear this. Pogum is the zwei dinim. One din, the kais has to be a kais shalem for Kiddush and kais of bracha. Number two, the shoimim have to make sure that they get yayin she'enei pogum. And as we proceed, we will see more about that. The next big sugya in Pogum is there any way to rectify? Let's say the child Taka drank from the bottle of wine or grape juice. Is there any remedy to the problem? So the emes is that Lemaisa, it's not in Bavli. And the question is, why do people do it? I think most common, it's interesting, most common when you see people, what's called tikkun, we'll soon explain what that means, with people rectify yayin, that's pogum, is by Havdalah. You see, during Shabbos, they don't mind drinking extra wine, they'll finish it. But Motzei Shabbos, the person already had enough wine, and he drinks the wine of Havdalah. So what do people do? They pour the wine good wine into the pogum, pour it back in the bottle, and it somehow became tikkun. Now, where did that come from? But I wanted to say before I forget to say it later, it always was a little bit of a surprise to me. People take the Kais Havdalah, and they masakin it, and put it back in the bottle, and what's that for next week? The Kiddush. The Noshim are frightened to death from drinking wine from Havdalah, and this wine from Havdalah. So I never found this mefurish until I saw the stipler in Archas Rabbeinu, Chelik Aleph Amud Kuf Chav Tes. He says, this is Mechab was an Adam Gadol from Horowitz. He once saw the stipler being masakin the Havdalah wine. So he says, but what about the women? So I said, oh, you mean about the chashash they're going to grow a beard? Don't worry. He goes, no, it's not the beard growing a beard. He told the stipler. It's the Mekadesh quotes the Shlah that women should not drink wine of Havdalah because Chava squeezed wine and that was to make a problem with Adam. So he goes, yeah, okay, but Lamaisa, it's not an Issa, and if Tikkun helps, if Bittul helps, it helps for the beard also. So after they finished talking, the disciple took the wine and poured it back in the bottle. In other words, he wasn't makabel a problem. He explained it's bottle. So if you know better, please tell me, but I guess the women have their own Shulchan Aruch, they will not go for that. But it seemed that if you want to be masak in the wine, it helps even for the problem of the noshim. Okay, now the question is, where did that come from? So again, in Bavli, steht es nicht. A Yushalmi, in the end of the 7th parak in Brachas, mamish, a half a line. Rabbi Yoina, Ta'am, Kisa, Kasa, U'mesakin. And he was masakin it. That's why the word tikkun is the right word. So who did it first? Rabbi Yoina. Zok toises and brachas nun beis. That what's pshat? Pirish. La'achash eshas mimenu. He made the wine pogum. Moisev olav kol shehu mayim o yayin. Vayimavarach alav. And then he used it for koishal bracha. So toises says a chiddush gadol, 2 chidushim. Number 1, you could be masakin it with wine or water. And number 2, a kolshu. Now the Rosh in Pesachim, in that parak, Arvei Pesachim, parak good, Simon Yudalit, the Rosh in Brachas, Ches Beis, and the Kolboy, Ayin Aleph, all say beferish. All you need, they say one Lashon, kolshu or mashu, but all you need a little bit on pogum wine or water, and it's mesukin. Okay, it's a little of a stira. You look in the Rosh. One place he says water first, as if water is better, but more often than not, the Rishonim say yayin, and even water works. So we definitely see the source of tikkun is a Yerushalmi. Lamaisa, there are those that hold tikkun doesn't work, and they learn the Yerushalmi totally different way. Remember, the Rosh in Brachas already explains that Rab Yoina was not Mesakin Pogum. He put in water to make it drinkable. Don't forget, their water and their yain in those days was too strong. So the Rosh says there is a way of learning that there's no makar of being Mesakin Pogum. The Beis Yosef and our Simon quotes from Minik Tzarfas that they did not rely on Yayim Mesukin. If it's Pogum, it's finished. But the Beis Yosef says, and I guess he broke party lines, but the minig in Ashkenaz is to rely on tikkun, and that's our minig. So even Svardim go with the minig that tikkun helps. But Lamaisa, there are those that are machma. And the Goyin Ma'aser Rav, in the new Ma'aser Rav, in Simon Peivov, the Goyin was makbid not to be Mesakin Yayim Pogum. Now, this is all Shittis, but again, we have a Shulchan Aruch in Sivav, Yechoyel Nesakin, Kais Pogum, Aydei Shesifu, Ma'at Yayin, Vafilu, Aydei Shesifu, Olav Mayim, Mesukin. So the Mechaba does accept the heta of Tikkun, but he does say wine is better than water. So Lamaisa, again, don't feel guilty. Most poskim say that tikkun does work, and that's the minig ha'olam. The next question is exactly what did that mean? Misakim. What is the procedure? Pour a little bit wine or water. So the emes is a little bit should work, and that's why I saw that in that Sefer Kos Yeshuas, he suggests that take the wine that spilled over, if the wine spilled over into the tats, into the tray, and use that as your misakin, because that wine spilled over before you drank, so it's not pogum. So it's convenient, especially it's shiorei koi, so it's a chshivas. Okay, fine. How much do you need to be misakin it? So l'chayr it's pashit a kolshu. Now this is a little bit of a question, because if the analogy of pogum is like the mizbeach, so if the mizbeach was missing a kazayas, you can't eat a drop and be misakin it. And some hold you have to be misakin it with the amount that it's missing, not just a drop. But the Shulchan Aruch, our Paisik, says a little bit's enough. But I did see, and this is an interesting thing, the Bach quotes, Bach and other Paisik quotes from Ram Metz, that he felt to be misakin it with a drop, it has to come from a revius. You know, if you have a revius of wine, so you pour a drop into the kais pogum, it works. Or you have a water bottle, and don't forget, if you drink from the water bottle, so the water is pogum. So you have to be misakin with water that's not pogum. So you have a fresh water bottle of a revius, you could pour from the water bottle into the kais, so if it comes from a revius, that's more choshev. That's the chumrah. The Mishmur is not quote this chumrah, but that's what the Bach says. I saw an interesting ha'ara. Can you open the faucet and put a drop of water from the faucet into the pogum? If you want to be chayish for the Ma'ametz, it has to come from Revius. How do you look at a faucet? Because if you look at the faucet, what comes out, it's only a drop. If you look at the water supply in the mountains, it's billions of gallons. But how do you look at the piping? So the Shmir HaShabbos in Perek Mem Zayin Ha'ara Ayin Ches Bible Tzarchiyah, which of course understandably so. How do you look at this? It's like a shtikla out of our range. But no doubt, I must tell you that although Marametz held it has to come from a Revius, Mr. Bura does not mention this. And I think the Hezbollah is, the Mr. Bura, on the Mechaba, that you're allowed to make tikkun, he asked the obvious question everybody asks, how does tikkun work? If the yayin is inferior, it's lacking quality, so you had a drop or a zeichel a churban, Mr. Bura says a very interesting lashon, and he basically says, you're allowed to masakin it, because Pogum is not a psul mamish, it's only the chatchila, so anything you do is good enough. Come out that lashon. I don't understand, but that's what he seemed to say. So once he's going with that attitude, it's not really a psul, so the tikkun could be with a drop of water, you don't need a revius. Mr. Bura takes a very mild approach to tikkun. Whatever you do is good, because the tikkun is really not so necessary, it's kosher without the tikkun. Okay, so this is basically a sort of introduction into the whole concept of tikkun. In fact, I should mention also that the Paiskim say that you notice Minig Yisrael, I don't know if the Olam notices or knows why they do it, but people have this interesting minig that they pour a little bit from the good wine into the kais pogum, and then they take the kais pogum and pour it into the bottle. Now some people do back and forth, that I don't think has any, shayrish. But this, what people do, im ein neviim b'nei neviim. I'll tell you why. Because the Maisa, the halacha is the following. Let's say someone absentmindedly, he was not thinking, he took his pogum wine and he poured that right into the wine bottle. So what he did is he made the whole wine bottle pogum, right? A bottle. Not true. Zok the mechaba, if you poured in Sif Ches, if you poured from pogum wine into a bottle of wine, guess what? It was bottle. So the mechaba, because there's more wine in the bottle than the pogum. Zok the Mishter Bura, of course, you have to make sure there's more wine in the bottle than the pogum. But what's the pshat? That regular bittul, You could have tarfus that is bottle and roiv, right? Midaraisa. So I told this person, guess what? You did better than you thought. Because this person poured the Pogum wine into the wine bottle. He wasn't masaking it. But you know what he did? A better remedy. Bittul. Bittul all agree works. So what he did was he forgot to make tikkun, but he made bittul. Very good. Excellent question. So, Zok the Mishtabura, you can't do a lechatchila. But he did it. So, in this case, that he did it b'di'eved, he came out ahead. But here's what I think, and the Mishtabura Kmat says it beferish, I think that's what it means to say, but I'm saying it, but it's pashut. That explains the minig ha'olam. First, we make tikkun. Tikkun you're allowed to make, right? Put in some drop of wine. Now, some hold tikkun doesn't work. So I do is, Liesa says, I pour it into the wine bottle. So I have a tikkun and a bittul. I aim about this lechatchila, but Mekadesh I rely on the shita that tikkun works. So I have a double remedy. Now, I have a little of a monoshach here. If you believe tikkun works, so why are you wasting your time? Teretz you hold doesn't work. So aim about this lechatchila. But it's not true. Because Allah Shulchan Aruch accepts tikkun as a valid eitzah. So the minig ha'olam, whether you realize or not, is we first make tikkun, and then we make bittul, which works the challah days. You see, look at Mr. Bura in Sif Cotton Chav Zayin. I believe that's what he means to say. Mr. Bura and the Sharatzian. So that's the minig ha'olam to do both. Next question: wine versus water. So Shulchan Aruch says both are good. I must mention there's some seif on the page in the new print. He says that water only works at times of Chazal that the water complemented the wine. It made it drinkable. But Tainach Sam Soifa, how does it work? In a mizbeach, instead of putting Evan, you put challah. Does it help? How does water mashlim the pogum? He says that bezmanehem it worked because it was meziga. But Lamaisi he says yayin shalanu, that it's mayim is poigimit, minosh and mesakenu alkein noy loy nearly. Some Seifa takes a very bold step and argue on the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says water works. Some Seifa, nothing doing. It doesn't work. It makes no sense. Now Lamaisa, this is again Mr. Bura is not mentioned the Chasam Seifa. Now probably he didn't see it because this is in the Kisvei Yad, or could be like I told you earlier. He held me Din. Pogum is not a problem, so we don't have to go to all the chumras. But I would say if you're some seif is an anical, you can't be misakin the yayin with water. Now yayin works, but water doesn't seem to work. I saw the Kavachaim Sifkat Lamed Beis quotes the Radvaz, which is much earlier than some seif, all says not to use water to make a tikkun. But again, even if you use water, Zakt Mr. Bura, don't overdo the tikkun. Because if you add too much water to wine, it loses its shem gafen. So you have to do things with seichel. First of all, of course, try to avoid using water. But if you use water, you have to make sure it's not pogum. Don't take your water bottle that you take with you when you go to work, because you drink from it. That's pogum, and that's a problem. Next question, probably never thought of, but it's a good question. Let's say your Friday night, someone made the wine pogum. What are you misakin it? Can you misakin yayin pogum on Shabbos or Yom Tov? So Tilde, what's the problem? When else do I do it, right? I mean, Havdalah, okay, Havdalah is already easier. But Tainit, the Yeshua Yakov, in Kuf Pei Beis, Sif Cotton Aleph, Magen Avram says in Shin Chav Gimel, Sif Cotton Yudal, according to Mekadesh, that it's also Lavatal Issa B'Shabbos or Yom Tov, the Ein Lechot Tikkun Gadol Mizu. So Tainit, the Yeshua Yakov, if you tell me you're being masakin it, you just ruined it for yourself. Because you can't misakin on Shabbos. So he is that it doesn't work. When does tikkun work? During the week. We'll soon see by Yesheva Brachis or Chveis Havdalah. But he says it doesn't work because Ein Lecha Tikkun Gadol Mizu. However, the Mechaba in Reish Ayin Aleph, Sif Tezayin, and Yud Zayin, Mr. Bura in Sif Kot Nun Zayin and Pei Aleph, all say for the Pashit, you're allowed to misakin the wine on Shabbos and or Yom Tov. I dekasha tikkun mana. So for us it's pashut. Because if it's mutter to drink b'di'eved, if you're allowed to make Kiddush on a b'di'eved lechatchila, like we say, Obviously, it's not so treif. So when do we say tikkun is when you make from pasul to kosher? I'll give you an example. If Eresh Gemara, Machaben Shulchan Aruch, in Taf Reish Memvav, Siv Beis. If you have a hadas that has too many berries, so it's pasul. But you take off the berries, the hadas is kosher. But you can't do it on Shabbos or Yom Tiv because of tikkun. There I understand because it's pasul. So you're being masak in it. But here the wine is kosher anyhow. So that's why the Toras Chaim B'Chaim Sofer in the end of Kuf Pei Beis, he said, I don't understand the Yeshuas Yaakov. He throws in maybe Yeshuas Yaakov went with the Shita that Pogum is pasul even b'diavad. Don't forget that was the Shita of Toisvis. And I was very relieved I found the Shmir HaShabbos in Mem Zayin, Ayin Hey. He says, according to Shlomo Zalman, the same Yisoid. Even the Yeshuas Yaakov is only machmir if you hold, because he held, according to the Shita, I should say, that Pogum is pasul b'diavad. Pasul b'diavad, but cheft is pasul. Then the tikkun is taka a real tikkun. So the Maisa, our minig of being masakin on Shabbos Yom Tov is a valid minig. Someone asked me, he heard about Pogum, he said, I'm also chayish for Pogum. Yeah, what do you mean? He said, in my family, the minig is that before you make Kiddush, you pour 3 drops of water into the bottle of wine. So I explained to him very gently, you're making a mistake. Because if you have a bottle of wine, presumably there's no Pogum. We don't have nervin, everything's Pogum. So why even Misaka, what's not Pogum? So Bema says this is a Magen Avram and Kuf Pei Beis, Sif Cotton Beis, that Lamaisa, the Magen Avram says, quoting Beis Yosef, that some had a minig al pi Kabbalah to add 3 drops to the wine before Kiddush. The Mavayabik says that a little more. Barichas, the Ben Ish Chai, in Shana Aleph, Breisha, Sif Tes, says he's Mekabel from one of the Mekubalim that were Nemonim, that's the minig even by Svardim. So the 3 drops is nothing to do with Pogum. If it is Pogum, why 3? And B'chal it's not Pogum. We don't have nerve and everything's Pogum. It's basically al pi Kabbalah, so if you do it, good. If you don't do it, it's not your minig. Oichet good. Question, when does something become Pogum? So the Bemis, it's interesting, the Taz says, even though the kais is overflowing, but if you drink a drop, it's already Pogum. It's still mole. Teretz says Pogum means you drank from this kais. This is shiorei kais. This is shirayim. That's the inferior quality of it. The Gemara says, Tomoi, Pogmoi. Now why do I stress that? Because the Maisa, as we will see, that if the only Pogum is if you drank from the kais, from mashal. I told you earlier, a child drank from the bottle. So then it's Pogum. How about if the child stuck his finger into the wine and licked it to taste the wine? So to us it sounds terrible, but it's not terrible. It's not Pogum. He didn't put his mouth to the lip of the cup. So that wouldn't be Pogum. He didn't drink from the kais. Okay, it's missing a drop, but it's not Pogum. And the chayr, we have a raya that sticking a finger into wine does not make it Pogum. In fact, we do it, Leile say, the 16 times. No. Makis, B'tzachadash Bachav, and Dom Beish Simazashim. Who says this? Not me. This is what the Paiskim say is a raya that a finger in wine, maybe it's not so fine, but it's not Pogum. In fact, the Big Day Yesha, in the end of Kuf Pei Beis, he points to an Abu Draham. We'll get to soon. The Abu Draham says that a finger in wine does not make it Pogum. And what's his raya? From the bris. The moil sticks his finger into the wine, puts it in the baby's mouth twice. It's Pogum. Teretz is, a finger in the wine is not Pogum. Freg the Big Yesha, why does he have to go to bris? Why don't you bring a raya from Pesach night? We do it 16 times. So we have 2 rayas that Yayin Pogum is when you drink, not when you put the finger into the wine. That's not Yayin Pogum. The Abu Draham, as I mentioned, Hilchas Avdallah, he says by bris milah that the person, the moil, puts his finger into the wine and then into the baby's mouth, and that's not Pogum. Now, the only difference is that by the bris milah, there's a little more of a Kiddush, because the baby drinks, whoever drinks it, and the baby's saliva goes back into the kais of bracha. But the answer to that is a Meferish Mechaba. Now what's the Mechaba? Bittul. Ma'adach, if you pour back Pogum, it's bottle, kolkin, a baby's microscopic drop, is a bottle. Now, but the kois of the Tzachadash Mechab, that no one drinks. I mean, the Svardim have a minig that they take that wine that was dipped in and they spill it in the street. It's mamish klipas, everything. So that's one thing we don't drink. So that's why, in a certain sense, the Mila is a big Kiddush. But someone asked me an interesting question. What's the problem by the Mila? If the baby drinks or not drinks, when does the moil stick his finger into the kais to give to the baby? After the bracha. So what's the problem? I said the problem is the real problem. Like I said earlier, there's a tvei dinim. There's a din in kais shel bracha. The kais has to be perfect, and don't drink kais that's pogum. This is the kais pogum. So I don't send the kasha. The Maisa, the Big Yesha asked this for a kasha, but the teretz is pashut. It's a problem on the kais and on the drinking. Okay. Lamaisa, there is a shita, the Rashban Brachas Daf Nun Beis, he says, Lav dafki, if you drink from the kais, it's pogum. But anytime you pour out of the kais, it's also pogum. How we learn the Gemara in Brachas that you're allowed to pour out is a different sugya. But Lamaisa, the Bach, El Yerabba says to be choishish for this Rashba, that pouring out is pogum, but the Mishtabura makes no mention of it. The Mechaba mentions fakert, that if you pour out, it's okay. So we go with that shita. Pogum is you drank from the kais, nothing less. Pouring out, pouring into a kais and drinking from the second kais does not make the first kais at all pogum. Interesting question. Someone was in an interesting mood and he took the kais and poured it into his mouth, but didn't put it to his lips. Does that make it pogum? So the Rav in Kuf Pei Sif Dalid, the Rav says the end of the day he drank from the kais. Even though he didn't put his mouth to the lip of the kais, but it went from the kais to his mouth. That's enough shtia that makes a pogum. But the Rav himself, of course, agrees to the Gemara. Now how could that be? If you pour it out, it's okay. If you stick your finger, it's okay. Pouring into the mouth is a problem, but it has a very pashut. What does it mean, shtia? Your mouth took from the kais. In this case, when you poured it, your mouth took from the kais. There's a hefsek in between, but nothing of substance in between. When you poured it into a cup and drank from the second cup, or put your finger in and took it out, you're not taking directly from the kais. So the Rav says there's chiddush, but one thing I will tell you, if you take a spoon full of wine and drink it, it's still kosher l'chol hadayis, because you didn't put your mouth to the kais. That's better than pouring into your mouth, because there it went from the kais into your mouth. A spoon, it went from the kais to the spoon and then to your mouth. Question, if you take a second spoonful, is it pogum because the remainder of your saliva went on the first spoon? The answer is enechanam, but that is bottle. Good. A beautiful tshuva about the question if you use a straw. So partially we would think if you use a straw to drink, and taka the Mekar Chayim on our Sif Kubei Beis, that's pogum. But you look at the Shvus Yankav Chayil, the Gimel Simon Yudalid, he's more noted to say that it's not pogum. The only problem is he has nitzik chibur, because the MS is, why is a straw different than any other keli, than a spoon? It's going from the cup into the straw into your mouth. Oh, so that's what I'm going to say. He's only talking if you're careful that is only a one-way street. Some people, so goes back. If we take a quick slurp up and it doesn't go back, we ikkered in the Yeshua Yaakov seems to be making. He has another problem again of the fact that it's nitzik chibur, but basically you're right. More often than not, it goes back. That makes it pogum mitzad that. A fascinating question. A person tasted wine. Now I heard this from a wine connoisseur. If you want to taste wine to know the taste, you can't swallow it. Doesn't work. You're supposed to taste it and spit it out. But anyhow, he tasted wine. He took from the kais, tasted a little bit, put in his mouth, toyim and poilet. Does the wine become pogum? So, in the lumdis, you could say te'ima doesn't need a bracha. Te'ima is not a ma'aser shtiyah. Te'ima on tainis could be more clear if it's mutter. And taka that seifa that kais Yeshua's Amud Ayin, he says that chayr, if it's not a shtiyah, it's not pogum. But I would have thought differently. Because the problem is you put your mouth to the kais. So again, your saliva, the fact that it's shiraya, shiure kais. So even though it doesn't have a din of shtia, the chayra, it should be a problem of the fact that it's pogum. And last but not least, the group of questions that we began with, specifically, how do you use the kais shel bracha? I drank from the kais, and I have family, I have guests. How do I give out the kais shel bracha? That's question number one. The zweite kasha I want to ask you is leil seder. Now, some people have a minig after every kais, they rinse out the kais, clean it out, and start again. Miyakid din, you don't need to rinse the kais, except maybe after the suda. So my question, let's say you have 2 ounces from the first kais on Pesach night, and why waste it? So you pour in extra wine. Is that okay, or is that wine pogum because it's the shirayim of the first kais? The dritte kasha is an interesting scenario. This happens quite often. By Havdalah, like I told you earlier, no one wants to drink the wine. They're not in the mood. So really, lechatchila, someone should drink at least a like lugmav of wine. But let's say no one wants to drink. So you have no other eitzah. You drink a half of my lugmav, a half of reis, and I'll drink it, and that's it. So really, we don't. It's 2 sheets in Shulchan Aruch, but Mekadesh says in Reish Ayin Aleph Sif Yudalid, b'shas atchak, you could rely on 2 drinkers to make the share shtia. My question is, the second person that's drinking the second half, he's drinking bonafide pogum l'chayr, no? The fair the kasha is ma'is mechol yom. Listen to this. I wonder if you ever noticed this. By a sheva brachas, so there are 2 kaises. There's a kais birchas hamazon and the kais sheva brachas. So typically, the one that bench makes a gaf on his kais, and a lot of places, the one that made the bracha drinks his kais, sheva brachas kais. What do they do then? They take these 2 kais pogums, they mix it up, and they give it to chassan and challah. So the chassan and challah get a double dosage of kais pogum. On a night, on a day, on a week, they need bracha, bracha, bracha. You give them a full-blown kais shel bracha. How did that work? I said, but that, what? Kais pogum, yeah. How did that work? So I was thinking, but maybe they're tzach, maybe not. You know, it's like the old child. If you can't have eggs left overnight or onions, you have to add something. Can you make eggs and onions and 2 negatives make a positive? And some make them, rather. But that's not a good raya. But maybe a better raya, it says in the Zalach and Shulchan Aruch, it's a quote from the Pirkei Eliezer, that a chassan and kal should not go alone in the street. So the chassan has a shayma, and when the kal goes, she has a shayma. So how does it work, chassan and kal go alone? Teretz is maybe 2 negatives make a positive. So maybe here also 2 pogums add up to 1, but it's not true. Because the other word is not to go alone. Like don't have eggs left alone. So if you have 2, it's not alone. But here you're telling me pogum and pogum is just an intensified pogum. So to answer the 4th kasha, I'm going to tell you the 5th kasha, and everything will stem. I'm in the Pesach mood, as you notice. The halacha is a mechaber Shulchan Aruch, whether you believe it or not, it's tough ayin bei sif tes. They lived in poverty in those days. They didn't have much. The kids, they had 1 big kais for 4 people. That's all they had. So the Mechaber says, as long as each one has a revius, you could use the same kais, fill it up to 4 revius in, and drink gesundheit. The obvious question is, why isn't that pogum? The first person, no, but the last 3, why is that pogum? So Mishnah Berurah says a few words, kular asyan mikoyach harishan. It's all like the first one. What does that mean? So here we come to Yisoid. The Mishnah Berurah says it at least in 3 places. A Yisoid, Gadol in Hilchas Pogum and Kais shel Bracha. That's the answer all the shaylas. Pogum means wine that was used and is no longer functional as Kais shel Bracha. For example, Havdalah wine, you have it in a cup. What do you do with it? So you put it in another cup. You put it in a little bottle. You want to use it for Kiddush next week? No, it's Pogum. But if you make Kiddush on a kais, and it's still in the kais, Zok the Mishnah Berurah, wine of kais shel bracha that's still in that kais is immune from becoming pogum. If it's the same wine in the same kais, it's not pogum. When is something pogum again? When you take it out of the kais, you pour it into the bottle, whatever you do, but in the kais, functioning is continuously functioning as a kais shel bracha. Therefore, when you have a kais for 4 revius, so it's still functioning as it was originally. Nothing changed. So if it was kais mahudam, as long as it didn't come out of the kais, it is still kais mahudam. The Mishnah Berurah and Kuf Pei Bei Sif Kot and Chav Daled, he says that don't forget, kais shel bracha is not only for the mavarech, for the shoisim. He says, so you want to give someone else the kais of a benching, but don't give him when you poured it off. Give him the original kais. Why? The original kais is not pogum. So even though you made benching bracha and you want to give it to someone else, keep it in the kais. It's not pogum. In Sharatzi and Reish Ayin Bei Sif Cotton Samach Tes, he says those that listen to Kiddush should make sure to have yayin she'enai pogum to drink. And what's the Asa? He says if you keep it in the same kais, it is not kais pogum. Mishnah Berurah says it in 3 places, like I told you, in Ilchas Pesach, Ilchas Kais Shel Bracha, and Ilchas Kiddush. I do know the Rav in Kuf Tzadik Sif Daled says beferish, not like that. The Rav spells out if once the first person drank from the kais, the rest of the wine is pogum, and that's why we'll soon see Hasidim don't follow the minhag that I'm going to tell you right now. But now we understand the 2 drinkers that are drinking the Havdalah wine. They could rely on the Mishnah Berurah that if you keep it in the kais, it's not pogum. So the first one drinks, it's not pogum because it's still in the same kais. This explains Hilchas Pesach also. And that's why Lamaisa, the Paiskim say, according to the Mishnah Berurah's Yesoid, wine in the kais is never pogum. I heard this interesting shayla. Someone was drinking Pesach by night, and whatever came out, he drank a little bit without a seba. He was trying to get in a position that make a say, whatever, and he drank a little bit of the wine without a seba. So he got nervous. Maybe now the rest of it is pogum, because he drank. It was not kais shel bracha, but the teretz is in the same kais. That is not a problem of pogum ever. And the truth is, if you know the lumdus of a seba, it's not pshat. It's not a shtiyas mitzvah. It's just missing the cheres. So that's not a problem. But I will tell you, which is interesting, a ma'aseh shehoya. I saw this in Sefer Kais Yeshua's. A moyel made the bracha, a gofen, of course, and then he was supposed to make the bracha on the milah. But he was a shtickle of a fruma, and after the gofen, he drank from the kais. Now why? Because he was afraid that the bracha on the milah, the kares habris, is a hefsik between the shtiyah. Now the truth is, he didn't invent Klal Yisrael. He didn't invent Yiddishkeit. We have been doing this for doivus. The pshat is very pashut that the bracha, the gofen, is part of the bracha of kares habris. But Lamaisi, he made a mistake, because now he's saying the bracha kares habris with the kais, that's not pogum, but it's missing. It's missing kais. What he should have done if he wants to be from is like the Mitzvah Kedushin do, that a little bit wine on the finger that spilled out when they made the gofen, you lick it. But the emes is, why do we have to be from in the whole Welt? It's a package deal. Why do you chayshiv hefsik? But this would be a new type of pogum, not that it's pogum in halacha because it's the same kais. It's pogum in the fact that it's chasa. Shever brachas is interesting and has to be clarified. Shever brachas, we have a problem, l'chayra, a real problem of pogum, because you're giving to the chasen and kala wine that's pogum, and this maybe derech tzachas doesn't work. Two pogum don't add up to heter. So I saw this Techemed in Mareches Brachas in Simon Amral. You have to find it. It's in Chelekei, page 363. It's hard to find, but he taka quotes from the Aderes that had a problem that l'chayra it's pogum. So there are 1 or 2 eitzes. Wait. So what you could do is after each one drinks, mix the kaises, and then be masakin it. If you really want, you could be masakin it each kais before you mix. I don't see a difference. But if you really want, but it's not going to work because no one's going to go for this, you could tell the gofen, the one that made the gofen on the benching, give your kais to the chassid. And you made a bracha on the shebrach, give yours to the kala. Because that's the same kais, and there's no pogum. But people want the double bracha. But if you want a double bracha, do it right, that it comes from a kais, water that's yayin, it's not pogum. So you be masakin it either after you mix, before you mix, but make sure that you don't have a yayin pogum. Leil Seder, Lamaisa, to add wine, let's say, you're preparing for the second kais, to add wine to the remainder of the first kais is not a problem with the holidays. Why not? Because that's tikkun. You're pouring in 6 ounces of wine, that's tikkun. But if you don't like tikkun, you still have a heta of original kais. I wondered one thing. If now it's a whole different kais, we passed on halacha, Ashkenaz halacha, that each kais is separate mitzvah, maybe the fact that it was good for the first kais, how does it work for the second kais? And it's in the same physical kais, but it's a whole different mitzvah. So I couldn't find anybody speaks about this, but I'm happy I found at least one mitzvah that Rav Sternbuch in the Tshuvas, Hey Kuf Mem Beis, he says, the poiskim is mavuyer, that you don't have to rinse the kais. You finish the kais, or don't finish the kais, the second kais, add to the first kais. What about Pogum? So if you're Sternbuch, what do you mean Pogum? It's not a problem, because you're masakin it. You add so much wine. But he says, Leite Zayda, he was an enik of the Goyin. The Goyin was machmer not to make tikkun. So we don't find that the Goyin had a problem. Why wasn't there a problem? He says, probably because he finished the whole kais, challah, and didn't have any remaining wine. But the question is, he says, if someone does have leftover wine, like the Goyin, that Pogum doesn't, that tikkun doesn't work, you can't use the remaining wine. But so what I don't understand is that if it's in the same kais, what's the problem? Unless he's chayish from my svara that a new kais is a new mitzvah. But the Goyin didn't hold a bittul. Oh no, bittul not that because you're pouring regular bittul. You mean imavat nechatchila. Here's imavat nechatchila. So I'd love to hear if you have more about that. But now to the last Achrein Chaviv, a simple question again to all of us. What do you do with the kais of Kiddush that you want to give out to people? So the emphasis, the Mishnah Berurah's Yisoid is very simple and easy to do. You give the kais to your family members and they drink. Interesting, the Goyin of Aisarav in Kuf Chav Aleph, it records here the Goyin drank the kais of Kiddush and he was Meshagel the Visu, that's Lashon Gemara regarding a Sarah Dvarim HaNember Kais Al Bracha, and he gave his wife the wine remaining in his kais, which is very l'shitasai. Taka, he held halacha that tikkun doesn't work, but there's not pogum, like the Mishnah Berurah said. It's the same kais, so fine. Now the only problem is if you have guests, and guests don't want to drink from your mouth. Now the emes you'll say, but it's a hiddah, drink from the kais, and the hiddah. But a bigger hiddah is the Lashon HaGemara and Brachas Chav Chesem Beis. They asked Rabbi Lezer when he was dying, what's our ticket to Elam Haba? And he responded, his har b'kvoit charecha. So to give someone a kais that you drank from, do you know if he's mafonik? Maybe he's an istanis. It's not a heintige chashash. We saw this from the Eretz Rabbah Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Lezer Gadol's Tzavah. So to give a guest, and I would believe a child-in-law, even though he's his you love him like your own son, but l'maisa there might be mefunik. They didn't grow up in this family. So to give a guest or a child-in-law or zichan in-law mamish is a problem. So how do you avoid the pogum issue? So you could pour off from the wine before you drink. You finish Kiddush, pour off in a cup, and drink. Why is not a hefsek between the gufen and your shtia? Terry says, tzorech for yenim is very much a tzorech for you. That's not be'ach gemoicha. So the way to do it is if you have no guests, pass around the kais. If you have a guest, then pour off first and give it to him. There is another eitz when you have a guest, and this you can use if you don't have a guest. If you put wine on the table in a cup before Kiddush, the Mechaber Reish Ayin Aleph says, kamat beferish, that the wine is like Kiddush wine. We had this, Rabbi Kamenetsky was in our camp for many summers, and he made Kiddush, and there was a big oilam, and everybody wanted to get from his wine. Probably they wanted Shirayim, but anyhow, but officially the Kais Bracha. And the Pasha was getting dangerous, there was a stampede to get it from his wine. So they did this eitzah, they put wine on every single table in a cup, and no longer do you take from the Rashiva's wine. But this is an eitzah ye'utza. Now, this is all with the shita of Mishnah Berurah that the wine in the Kais is not pogum. As I mentioned, the Rav and the Taz both say that the wine in the kais could be pogum after you drank it. Now Chassidim typically, I imagine this was they typically go with the Rav Shita. So by Chassidim minig is the person drinks, then he's masak in the wine, and then he pours it into the bottle. The mailu with that is that at least now you have a tikkun and a bittul. So again, even though I'm about this chatchila, but there's a tikkun with a bittul. But the point is, a person has to do with seichel. And I'll leave you with what Shlomo Zalman says, and this is in Chas Pesach, Shlomo Amud Reish Chafei. He said, "Boy urei kamachavim Yisrael samitzvos." How people are so busy with the kais shel bracha, and some people are makbid to drink from the actual kais to get the hiddur. Even though some people are mafonik, when it comes to kais shel bracha, there's such a chavivus that it transcends all kapetis. And he says, but he saw his own eyes. So Mizam was old enough to see this. The Mor Da'ar Yisrael, B'Chaim Zonafeld, he says an istanis noira, very, very sensitive person. But when he had kais shel bracha once, so Mizam watched it, it spilled out from the kais onto a plate of leftover food. Now don't ask why they used that, but that was the story. And so wine spilled from the kais onto that used plate. That wasn't his plate. But he had such a chavivus for kais shel bracha, he picked up his two hands and he relished it, drank from the plate of Shira Yakov. So he said, this is a man that was an istanis nifla, but the love for kais shel bracha transcended all concerns. The ik is Kiddush Yisrael Kiddush man, I couldn't talk to you all. Go ahead, the voices, hopefully.
Guests have to.
No, just go in. Yeah, okay,
Shame, irgend your Torah like to give a big yashikayah to ourselves Smith with today's shir. Have to get sponsoring a shir, call irgend your Torah at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Chadanya ben Akash email to Kiddush Baruch Hu Zakis as Yisrael Fig Hibram Torah Mitzvah Shenema Alo Inoy Chofes Aman Tzidka Yagdol Torah V'Yader. Yeah, sure, yeah, Kais, but the shir does not become Pogum, so there's no need to rectify it like number 8 and 9. But it's seeking with today's shir.
Just let's Chazal, we learned today the importance of Yayin Pogum in a certain sense. Mitzarecha, you're allowed to, Chazal allowed you to eat before Havdalah. Obviously, there's a lot of a problem to Pogum, but then again, at the end of the day, it's still kosher wine. You make a bracha on it, and if you have no other choice, you're allowed to make a Kiddush or any kais shel bracha on Pogum. Why is Pogum pasul? Either akaveno fechasecha, it's an inferior wine, or it's a pagam, something like a mizbeach, more of a lofty moshel. It applies not only to Kiddush, but all kais shel bracha, benching, bris, chasana, sheva brachas, la'alocha, yotzei b'diavad, but chatchila, we see how right we go. Taisus holds that tikkun, the Taisus holds it's pasul b'diavad, so therefore we should keep that in mind. We did see that lamaisa, if a person, if it became pogum, it's shaykh to be mesaken it by adding a little bit wine or water. Pastas, even a kosher was enough. The Chemseif had a problem with using water today, bizman hazeh, but the Mechaber is makel even with water, but zicha, a little bit of wine or water does the trick. There's a hiddur that it should come from a revius of wine or water. The original bottle should have a revius. The minig Yisrael is to do tikkun and then do bittul, pouring it back into the wine bottle. We did see that some don't accept the heta of tikkun at all, so then it wouldn't help to be masakin it and bittul aim of atnes chatchila. So they would have to use the wine taka for the suda, for baking or cooking. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. The 3 drops that people add of water to a bottle of wine has nothing to do with tikkun or pagam. It's al bikabala. If someone stuck his finger into the wine, even if he licked his finger, the wine is not pogum. We had 2 rayas from Leil Seder and from the bris. We did see also that if someone tasted just to taste and spit it out, that's probably more of a problem of pogum, but pouring into another cup is not a problem. Pouring into one's mouth directly is a problem, as we said. Taking a spoonful or even a straw, pashtus, shouldn't be a problem. We had a big yisoid mishnah that if you have the wine in the original kais, it never becomes pogum. So that would be an eitzah for Kiddush, for kais shel bracha. That's why a big kais on the El Seder works. That's why, as we said, 2 drinkers don't have a problem of pogum. But giving out the kais shel bracha, again, mi'ikad din, you could give out the kais and pass it around the table. When someone has guests, he should not give a guest without asking first, and people are embarrassed to say, so probably you just pour it off first. We said by Sheva brachas, you mix the kais, you should be masakin it either before you mix or after, but you have to masakin the wine of the Sheva brachas that is both pogum, and as we saw, the chavivas ha-mitzvah, the kais atzmai, the wine, even the shrayim of it, has a special chshivas by the Rebbeinu Shalom.